One of the things I really wanted to talk to you about is raw milk and your take on whether raw milk is suitable for the mother during breastfeeding. Is it suitable to introduce to the child? If so, when? Or is raw milk, like we would hear from our three-letter agencies, basically a walking death sentence if we even look at it?
Well, I personally love raw milk. It's very beneficial for us. You know, raw milk has a microbiome which is intact, right? Because it's not heated, not pasteurized. We're not losing the enzymes that are included in milk when it comes from the udder. And also, you know, the healthiest food for a baby is mama's raw milk.
Mm,
So I think just from that perspective, it's like, okay, so there's definitely something to this. Now, from the GAPS perspective and a microbiome perspective, sometimes people can be really reactive to dairy. And this is typically, you know, this is a common thing people say, the how, not the cow, right? How's the cow raised? How's the dairy commercialized and treated? And its long line of processing, you know, before you buy it from the grocery store and it ends up in your mouth. So sometimes the people that I work with who are sensitive, they need to take a total break from dairy. 6 weeks typically to remove all of the commercial residue of
mm,
dairy from their systems. Then we start, you know, during that 6 weeks, we're also building the gut. We're using meat stock, we're using fermented foods to help re-inoculate the gut microbiome and support the overall health, bring down inflammation. Then we slowly start adding dairy back in, starting with ghee. Ghee is very high fat and the milk solids are cooked out of it. And so it's usually one that people can start with. Once ghee becomes a very healthy food for you and you don't have any inflammatory responses from it, then you move on to butter.
mm.
Then you move on to a homemade 24-hour fermented yogurt. And the fermentation process actually removes the lactose. It brews out the milk sugar, which can also be fodder for pathogenic overgrowth. We give the 24-hour fermented yogurt or whey from that yogurt, and that provides our body with beautiful fat soluble vitamins. It gives us the beneficial bacteria. There's plenty of enzymes that are still intact because we've ideally started from raw milk. And we have another step on our dairy introduction protocol that you have then completed, and you move on to kefir. And kefir is like the gold standard probiotic. I always suggest making it at home yourself from raw milk. To start, it can be from any animal. And kefir contains 60 to 70 beneficial strains of yeast and bacteria. And that yeast part is really important because remember, throughout this conversation, I've mentioned how yeast can cause the sugar cravings, yeast
Mm.
can cause the whiny and cranky behaviors. Yeast is a big deal, and every modern person has yeast. Every modern person in touch with the Western world or
Mm-hmm.
Western, you know, Western things that we get ourselves into trouble with, like sugar and processed food and alcohol and pharmaceuticals, all those. Yeast is a protector, actually. So yeast is going to help buffer toxicity. Yeast and parasites, it buffers toxicity. So when we start bringing in beneficial strains of yeast from our homemade milk kefir, we are going to kill off the pathogenic yeast, or really a better way of saying it is just to bring balance to the whole system.
Mm.
So raw milk itself, I consider a very advanced food. And what I mean by that is if you're a healthy, robust person with no digestive or immune symptoms, you are likely going to thrive on raw milk. However, if you are coming to this podcast or you're coming to one of my courses and you are already sick, you're not typically going to start just on raw milk, right? We're going to move through that dairy introduction protocol, do some gut healing, and really support your microbiome before you graduate to raw milk. So the question of breastfeeding moms, should they have raw milk? I am a huge advocate for raw milk products. It just depends on where
Right.
you are in your healing journey, how you're going to be able to digest that food. And I think that that's like the most practical approach that I can take with dairy because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we buy 4 gallons of raw milk a week. We love raw milk. I'm a huge advocate for it, but just by, you know, blankly saying that everyone should be able to digest and have raw milk, that's just not the state of humans right now in the world. We're
Yeah.
not that healthy.
All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.